Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one who's having fun. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one. Sometimes I feel like I just wanna run away from everyone. Don't feel the way I do. Don't think the way I do. Don't look the way I do. Don't wanna be like you. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one.
What's up, guys? This is my new short form podcast, Nothing Assured. My intention for creating these episodes is to share what I've learned about foreign and domestic policy from the very best voices within the independent space. This includes everyone from Scott Horton, the director of the Libertarian Institute and author of many great books about the terror wars and Russia-U.S. relations, Dave DeCamp, who runs an incredible daily show for antiwar.com, people like Tom Woods, who covers a variety of topics from Austrian economics to interviews with alternative medical professionals, comedian and part of the problem host Dave Smith, probably the largest voice within the libertarian realm, Keith Knight, Kyle Anzalone, both fellows from the Libertarian Institute and investigators for antiwar.com, Daryl Cooper, aka Martyrmaid, Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. I mean, I can just keep going on and on. So these are just some of the people that I rely heavily on when doing my own research and while cross-referencing all information available to me. I can only implore everyone that listens to this to do your own research and cross-reference everything that I'm saying, because taking all of this information at face value without delving into it yourself doesn't get us anywhere. It just completely ends the conversation and we're right back to square one. I mean, that's how ChatGPT will win. And they'll program the Terminators, or we'll get taken over by those robot dogs. So let's get into this. For my very first episode, I wanted to talk about one of the most ridiculous and recent events in modern day history. It's so ridiculous that I almost can't believe it, but then I remember that all the U.S. policymakers ever do is run the same exact playbook every game, every down, despite it delivering 0 wins per season. Here we go. So on September 22nd, 2025, New York City hosted the Concordia Annual Summit. This is a global affairs forum held by the NGO Concordia, founded by Matthew Swift, who is closely associated to Rupert Murdoch and was employed by Murdoch's company, News Corporation, in the beginning of Swift's career. But that's an entirely different rabbit hole altogether. The summit's goal is to focus on public-private collaboration and creating cross-sector partners to achieve sustainable social impact. But what the summit really is a place where political elites, global leaders, warmongers, all one and the same, and other think tanks can discuss how to keep revenue rolling in for their special interest groups. And for these shareholders, the most important and the largest profits to be made are when you create a conflict where you deem war is the ultimate solution. In the guise of security and geopolitical risk, they have conversations about arms controls, role of military technology in conflicts, and partnerships within the defense industry. Literally just putting the Fed's Burr machine on standby. In 2024, the summit included a specific fireside chat on data-driven warfare, navigating the future battlefield, featuring the Vice Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs, Christopher W. Grady. These sessions explore how advanced technology, including artificial intelligence, is changing military operations and how they directly involve the defense and munitions sector. In conclusion, the Concordia Annual Summit is just a convention for destruction and war. So what better place for former CIA director under President Barack Obama, David Petraeus, meet, shake hands with, and praise former leader of al-Qaeda, Ahmed al-Shara, or better known as Abu Mohammad al-Julani. Yes, that al-Julani from the Iraq War in 2003. More on him in a bit. But first, let's talk about the U.S. Forever Wars advocate, David Petraeus. My hero and the best foreign policy researcher in the world, Scott Horton, refers to Petraeus as the great American fraud and the worst military leader of the last generation. Why? What are some of his failures? Well, the two big ones would be the facilitation of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And when pressed on these two major failures, Petraeus insisted that it's because we should still have soldiers in Afghanistan today. Quote, in essence, then, from the beginning through to the end, but especially at the end, American commitment was lacking, and that we need more time and generational commitment. I'm sorry, can you please say that again so all the Afghanistan veterans with PTSD, dead brothers, missing limbs, and traumatic brain injury can hear you correctly? America was lacking in their commitment, and we should also subjugate our future generations to the forever wars? Pardon me, and I'm not quite sure what age group is going to listen to this, but absolutely fuck yourself. 20 plus years, 2,324 American servicemen have been killed in Afghanistan. The goal from someone who pressed us to continue two pointless wars, cheated on his family with a mistress while simultaneously leaking above top secret documents to her, not only should be barred from foreign policy, but should be charged with treason. Petraeus was also one of the instrumental pieces in developing the COIN doctrine. COIN stands for counterinsurgency and is a military strategy that involves civilian and military actions to defeat an insurgency. Instead of focusing on killing the enemy, what COIN theorizes is that the most important objective is that you can propagandize the local populations to garner their support. It's called winning the hearts and minds. What Petraeus helped design was a strategy that made endless wars appear more palatable to the American public by framing them as humanitarian or nation-building efforts rather than military occupations. But it didn't work. Despite all the efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq, civil war continued, and the U.S. presence in the region created more hostility to American interests. A core tenet of COIN involved arming and training local factions to fight insurgents, creating even more local conflicts. Stanley McChrystal, JSOC, and Michael Flynn, director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, both argued that for every one insurgent killed, 10 new ones are created. In Iraq, Petraeus used Sunni militias against al-Qaeda, which created a long-term sectarian violence. In conclusion, COIN is not a viable strategy for achieving peace, but actually increases the tensions between factions, and is an extremely costly way to justify endless military engagement. But putting all that aside, let's just say David Petraeus wanted us to stay in Afghanistan and fight in Iraq and Syria because he really hated al-Qaeda, their affiliates, ISIS, ISIL, and any other jihadist group in the region. Again, pardon me, but why the fuck are you shaking hands with one of the most brutal former al-Qaeda terrorist leaders? I'll get into the why, but first, let's meet al-Julani. Abu Mohammad al-Julani's family was from the Golan Heights prior to the Six-Day War. They were displaced, and I believe they ended up living in Syria. This is where al-Julani's dad was a very prominent dissident voice to the Assad regime and was jailed for protesting the Ba'ath Party. After the father's release, they moved to Saudi Arabia and had al-Julani. The family made some sort of agreements with Syrian intelligence and were given safe passage back to Syria. I haven't done a ton of research other than the family's hatred for the Assad regime, which is pretty important. Other than that, let's skip to the start of the 2003 Iraq invasion. Immediately following the US-led invasion of Iraq, al-Julani joined the al-Qaeda Iraq insurgency, later known as the Islamic State of Iraq, and began fighting against American troops for 3 years. He was arrested by American troops while attempting to plant explosives. He bounced around multiple US-operated prisons in Iraq, including Camp Bucca and Abu Ghraib. For 5 years, al-Julani networked in prison. At Camp Bucca, he strengthened his jihadist affiliations, most notably befriending Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, former leader of ISIS. His release in 2011 is extremely unbelievable. The official narrative is that he was released under a false name with no charges against him, coinciding with the Syrian civil war. In other words, this wasn't a lack of aptitude by the US intelligence agency. And what follows and what is happening today is all the confirmation we needed. He was released as an asset, despite him murdering Americans for a living. And immediately after his release, al-Baghdadi sent al-Julani to Syria with money and instructions to start an al-Qaeda branch, the al-Nusra Front. He declared war against the Assad regime, and al-Nusra became a force against the Syrian government. Under al-Julani's leadership, al-Nusra committed numerous war crimes and human rights abuses in Syria, widely documented by human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, as well as the UN Security Council. The insurgent group was responsible for executing captured government soldiers, pro-government militia members, and civilians. In most cases, the executions were made public. In December 2014, al-Nusra fighters shot and killed a woman in a public square in the Idlib province after accusing her of adultery. There were many cases of stonings for the same reasons as well. In July 2016, the group released a video showing the execution-style killing of about a dozen pro-government soldiers. Al-Nusra Front also targeted religious minorities, something the Assad government made a point to protect. This included Alawites, Druze, and Christians. In 2015, al-Nusra fighters killed 24 Druze civilians in Idlib province after a dispute over a confiscated house. In 2013, Human Rights Watch investigated an offensive led by al-Nusra and rebel groups, concluding that the killings and hostage-taking rise to the level of crimes against humanity. In 2012, al-Nusra claimed responsibility for suicide car bombings in Aleppo that killed dozens of people, mostly all civilians. In 2013, in Damascus, they were suspected of carrying out a deadly bombing that killed dozens of people, mostly civilians and children. Al-Nusra also operated its own detention centers where torture was systematically used against detainees, including peaceful activists and perceived opponents. They also abducted civilians for large ransoms and for leverage. In 2015, they kidnapped and tortured Hana Jalof, a Roman Catholic priest. They destroyed religious and cultural sites mostly in places like Idlib. They imposed a strict interpretation of Sharia law, persecuting and murdering non-Sunni residents and forcing them to convert to Sunni Islam. Al-Julani's al-Nusra Front's destruction and tyranny in Syria was nothing short of a crime against humanity. And the US allowed all of this to happen so they can topple the Syrian government, because Assad's relationship with Russia and Iran was very strong, economically and within the trade market. But why? Why should that matter to the US? Well, because our most important ally in the Middle East wants an ethno-state. But more on that later. In 2016, al-Julani distanced himself from al-Qaeda. What the US media and government pundits are attempting to do now is pretend that this break was because al-Julani had to come to Jesus. Completely false. With al-Qaeda's leadership's blessing, al-Julani formed Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. They still fought the Assad regime, they still carried out bombings, and they still heavily targeted cities like Damascus, Idlib, and Aleppo. Only now, they also fought against other rebel factions in a bid for dominance in northwest Syria, which is an absolute shit show even today. By this time, the al-Qaeda-led dominance in Syria was split. The Syrian forces were recapturing cities, and the United States had enough of the jihadists because they weren't getting the job done. In 2017, the US government placed a $10 million bounty on al-Julani's head. The reward was part of a Rewards for Justice program and was offered for information leading to his location, arrest, or conviction. That same year, al-Julani's JFS and other groups merged into Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. They continued to fight in the northwest region of Syria. So despite the many name changes, HTS is still al-Qaeda, just with a rebranded asterisk next to the name. And that brings us to present day. In 2024, HTS emerged during the Syrian civil war, mostly because it was receiving funds and weapons from Israel. Former IDF Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot confirmed that Israel supplied HTS to fight opposition groups for years. Side note, Eisenkot also admitted the following: to the attempted assassination of Hezbollah leader Nasrallah in 2006, the Saudis and Israelis' complete agreement about Iran being the real and largest threat to the region, and that Israel struck thousands of targets in Syria without claiming responsibility. So yes, Israel was helping Al-Qaeda, Nusra Front, JFS, HTS, ISIS, ISIL, and other jihadist Syrian rebels to topple the Syrian government. So with the complete support of Israel, Israel's allies, and Israel intelligence Mossad, HTS's December 2024 offensive led to capturing Aleppo and Hama before taking Damascus. This led to the withdrawal of Assad's regime and key ally Hezbollah. And after the capture, much like when they were al-Nusra, HTS teamed up with the other Syrian rebel groups and went door to door to massacre Druze, Christian, and non-Sunni civilians in the region. These mass murders had become so horrifying that HTS leadership warned its own soldiers to stop filming the mass executions because they were losing the very minimal support they had by default. In January 2025, HTS was formally ordered to disband. But what this really means is that HTS leader al-Julani, now Ahmed al-Shara, transitioned his HTS terrorist insurgency into the Syrian government. So they never really left nor disbanded. They just became the US and Israel's puppet government in Syria until they can figure out how to rid them and expand greater Israel. That last part's my opinion, but I'm pretty sure it tracks. In July 2025, the United States removed HTS from its foreign terrorist organization list. The UN, UK, EU all still list HTS as a terrorist, whether that's a sanctions list or otherwise. That leads us right up into September 22nd, 2025, when two warmongers and war criminals met, shook hands, praised one another, took pictures, met other dictators fighting proxy wars for Israel and the United States, and discussed the future all together. Knowing everything we know about Al-Qaeda, the past 20 plus years in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, I'm appalled by how disgusting David Petraeus is as a person. To sacrifice U.S. servicemen in forever wars that he advocated for, then tell the survivors that they weren't committed enough and their future children need to fight in the Middle East as well, all while behind the scenes becoming pals with the man responsible for over 2,000 U.S. deaths. How absolutely disgusting. Why is this acceptable? Well, for the U.S. and Israel, it weakens Iranian alliances, withdrawal of Iranian diplomats, military commanders, and the IRGC. It's a huge financial blow to trades between Syria, Russia, Iran, and even China. It negatively impacts the axis of resistance. Russia still has bases in Syria, but the HTS government is looking at reviewing all existing military agreements. So that's why. The forever wars Petraeus always wanted. And all at the sacrifice of whomever is the closest expendable asset. American, Syrian, Saudi, Afghani, Iraqi, Christian, Druze. It doesn't matter. And per Petraeus, all the future generations are completely expendable too. And just as a side note, just prior to Trump shaking hands with terrorists in New York City, the anti-war president has sent brand new threats to the Taliban-led government in Kabul that if they don't turn over the Bagram air base within their own country, we are going to enter another 20-plus year war over absolutely nothing, to win absolutely nothing. All for what? A blue and white flag flying in the Middle East? Pass. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'm hoping most of these episodes, if I have time and anger enough to make any more, won't be this black-pilled, but I appreciate you tuning in to the end. Peace.